We are honored to have with us today a colleague who's been working for years on this project with us, Dr. Amy Giroux. She is an associate director of the Center for Humanities and Digital Research at the University of Central Florida and co-director of UCF's Veterans Legacy Program. And her research on the St. Augustine National Cemetery has brought to light new information on burials of Plains Indian warriors, Civil War soldiers, and Seminole War history. So we're very grateful to have her here, and we're looking forward to her presentation. And that's a very short bio for someone who's done so much. So you're a very valued colleague, and we're glad to have you here.
Dr. Amy Giroux approaches the podium.
Thank you, Lori. I appreciate that.
Text, Dr. Amy Giroux, Associate Director, UCF Center for Humanities and Digital Research.
I love it when the technology works. Can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to speak with you today about my research. Teaching difficult histories wouldn't be such a prevalent topic these days if people in power in the past did not try to erase different cultures. The sessions yesterday and today are meant to be teaching sessions and to start and continue the conversations that Noreen started a number of years ago. Now, some of you may already know about the 10 warriors who are buried here in Florida. Some others in the room may not know about them. And this morning I'm going to tell you briefly about those 10. And then I'm going to talk about how I and my UCF colleagues are trying to bring some of this history into K-12 classrooms within the state of Florida. So I'm a family historian. I spend days, nights, weekends researching not only my own family and walking where my own family has walked. Being in the place brings you much closer to your own history and to your own heritage. I've also walked in many of the places that your imprisoned kin have walked, and being in those places and spaces has affected me tremendously. Everyone has a family. Everyone deserves to know where their kin are buried and to be able to have them honored and have them remembered. And I've spent the last 6 years researching the unknowns in St. Augustine National Cemetery. And I'm trying to restore their names, to restore them and their connections to their families. Because it's important to me to be able to walk up to these headstones and instead of saying, Mrs. West, I know she's Mary Elizabeth Straw West, I know her life now. And I'm trying to do that for the others who are listed as unknowns. So last year, Steve Roberts from the National Park Service just cold call reached out to me and said, I hear you've been researching in the cemetery and the Cheyenne and Arapaho would like to talk to you. And I can't be more honored to have landed in the place and the space and the people that I've been working with for the last few years. It's been very important and very emotional for me to do this work. So this morning, yesterday you saw a video. Those of you who are in the room saw a video where I was talking about some of the travel, how the prisoners got from Indian Territory here to Florida. And today, this morning, I want to pick this up, that whole story up in North Florida and give you some details about the prisoners who are still here in Florida. To the east of Lake City, Chief Graybeard tried to regain his freedom by jumping out of the window of a moving train. And after he had jumped from the train, Lieutenant Pratt told the soldiers just to recapture him. However, after they searched for a while, they had backed the train up, they searched for a while, they were starting to go back to the train. The soldiers saw Graybeard break cover and start to run down the tracks. And the guard, disobeying orders, shot him. They put him back on the train, and then the train continued on. Graybeard died of his wounds about 2 hours later, just to the east of a town called Sanderson. And the next station on the railroad was Baldwin, Florida. These are the old tracks in Baldwin, and this is the old station in Baldwin. Graybeard's body was left at Baldwin Station with the railroad crew, and they took him about a quarter of a mile away from the station to Piney Grove, which was the African American cemetery in Baldwin.
A slide shows a photo of railroad tracks.
I'm missing a slide. Awesome. I want to thank Bill Tallbear for allowing me to be with him at Piney Grove yesterday to honor his ancestor. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you in that place and space and to hear your story. And I'm looking forward to hearing more of your story later on today. So hours after Graybeard was left at Baldwin, the prisoners reached Jacksonville, Florida, and they were taken on board a steamer on the St. Johns River. On that steamer, they went south to a railroad junction on the east side of the river. They had to cross the river, and they went to a station called Tocoi. It was a small shipping area. It had a rail line that actually went out to the water. So the picture on your left, the picture on your left is that end of the dock. And if you look at it carefully, you can actually see a steamship that's up against the end of the dock, and you can also see the rail cars that are out there. So they were taken off the steamship, and they were put on these rail cars, and they were taken across to St. Augustine. Now the train, it was called the St. John's Railroad, and it was actually a horse-drawn originally. I don't know yet at the time period when they were brought here whether it was still a horse-drawn railroad or whether they had actual engines on it. This is a map of that area, and it shows the Tocoi Station and the St. John's Railroad that runs across to St. Augustine. So that picture that is on the front of the program, where it shows the ship, they're standing on top of the fort and they're looking out and there's a ship. I've heard interpretations saying they're watching the ship that brought them in go away. That is not the case. They actually came into St. Augustine by train. So once they reached the station in St. Augustine, they were loaded into carts, and those carts took them from the train station to the fort itself.
A photo depicts a group of captives at Fort Marion.
The U.S. government loves records. Lots of governments love records. And the Army kept extensive records and correspondence concerning the captives here. And during one of the first few days of their time actually at Fort Marion, they were photographed after their shackles had been removed. You've seen a lot of these photographs. They're stereograms, so you can actually look at them in 3D if you have the right glasses to do so. But a lot of times, all you'll see is this single image. But they did actually do them in stereograms. So there were 33 Cheyenne, 27 Kiowa, 9 Comanche, 2 Arapaho, and 1 Caddo that were brought here. And in addition to the 72, there was the wife and daughter of the Comanche chief Black Horse.
One of Pratt's letters is displayed on a slide.
Within a few months of their arrival, Pratt began to treat the majority of the men as military recruits. And in his letter from August of 1875, he says, "The able-bodied young fellows I have organized into a company and drill daily, as well as teach them English words. They are uniformed and have non-commissioned officers. Heap of Birds and Howling Wolf are sergeants. I have had a house built on top of the old fort where they now live and have all the benefits of view and sea breeze." Now, Pratt may have had good intentions and worried about their health, but he didn't recognize at all the importance and the value of their Indians' culture, and he tried to eradicate it. He tried to erase that culture.
A photo of Fort Marion Barracks.
This photograph shows at least 60 of the men in uniform. At the top left, you can see the actual barracks that were built on the northern side of the fort, and that's what they lived in. Now, very rarely are any of these photographs labeled with names. We do know that the man on the left in this photo is Heap of Birds. The rest of them were listed as Hummingbird, Mountain Bear, someone whose name was not listed, Zotom, who was a prolific ledger artist, and Whitehorse.
The 6 soldiers in the photo stand at attention in their military uniforms.
Now, much of the correspondence between Pratt and the agents in Indian Territory concerned money and gifts that were sent by the prisoners back to their families, and also letters talked of gifts being sent to the prisoners from home. They would receive moccasins, they would receive items from home, and these letters talked about those gifts going back and forth. Now, this particular letter has a section from Heap of Birds to his family, and this would have been told by Heap of Birds to their interpreter, George Fox. George Fox would have then told the content of that to Captain Pratt, and then Pratt would have written this letter. So it's kind of like the telephone game, you know, what interpretations and changes happened between Heap of Birds' actual words and what wound up in the letter. No one can tell. But I would like to read what he said. Tell my family I am well, and Captain Pratt is along with me yet, and I am all right. They must not cry or mourn for me, but have strong hearts. I feel good every day, and with the young men, I am trying to pick up this white man's road. Tell the agent I want my children to go to school. I told the agent once before, but I have not heard whether they are in school yet or not. Heap of Birds did not live to see the day that they were released from Fort Marion. He was the last of the prisoners to die here. The 10 prisoners who did not go home, that they're still here in Florida, I would like to tell you briefly about each of them and what happened to them.
A slide is titled Graybeard.
We've spoken about Graybeard prior to this, but I still want to go in order of the deaths in Florida. We have newspaper archives that are available to us. A lot of them are digitized now and available online. And like the article on the right, and along with Pratt's papers and other Army correspondence, I've been able to trace most of the story of the prisoners here. So Pratt had to notify his superiors of each death, and these notices and most correspondence, they're worded in a way that's kind of specific to the military. The genre of this kind of correspondence, it usually is between officers, and it starts with the words, "I have the honor of," and it ends with, "Very respectfully, your obedient servant," and then the signature. And I have had Army officers in today's world write me letters, and they still sign the end of their letters with, "Your obedient servant." I have the honor to inform you that Graybeard, Cheyenne Chief, jumped out of a car window at 3 o'clock this morning near Houston, Florida. The train backed up and we found him. He attempted to run away and was shot by the sergeant of the guard and died in 2 hours. Body left at Baldwin, Florida. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, R.H. Pratt, 1st Lieutenant, 10th Cavalry. Just the wording puts a different spin on what really happened.
A slide contains a news article.
Once the prisoners reached St. Augustine, they attracted a lot of local attention. And in a very long newspaper article in the St. Augustine Press, the author described the death and burial of the Kiowa chief, Coabotita. I apologize if I'm not pronouncing his name correctly. As soon as the prisoners had reached St. Augustine, they took him to the post hospital as he was very ill on the trip. They let his brother, Toothless, attend him. And the author of the article wrote, "He would probably have lived until Monday had he been left alone, but his brother, perceiving his end approaching, dressed him in full dress, painting him, and fulfilling the requirements of the Indian custom. On Monday, White Horse, Woman's Heart, Double Vision, and Lone Wolf were brought from the fort under guard to view the remains of their friend. They were most affected, all shedding tears, and 2, White Horse and Toothless, completely breaking down. They were left by themselves by order of the commanding officer, Major Hamilton, and after a short speech from the brother of the deceased, expressed themselves ready to proceed. A pine coffin was then brought, into which they placed with their own hands the dead chief, and the body borne by 4 privates and followed by the Indians, proceeded to the southeast corner of the post cemetery where a grave had been dug. Son died on May 24th, 1875, 3 days after their arrival.
A slide is titled Lean Bear, Cheyenne Chief.
The 3rd prisoner to die was Lean Bear. He had tried to kill himself outside of Nashville, and Lean Bear and the 2 soldiers that he had attacked were left in Nashville until they healed. Lean Bear got to St. Augustine on June 7th, 17 days after the other prisoners had arrived. And when he got to Fort Marion, he refused to eat any food, and he died of starvation 3 weeks later on July 24th, 1875.
A slide is titled Mamonte, Kiowa Chief.
The news of Lean Bear's death and that of the Kiowa chief Mamonte were sent by telegraph to the Assistant Adjutant General in Chicago. Mamonte, who was also known as Swan, man who walks above the ground, or Skywalker, was spokesman for the prisoner. He died of dysentery on July 29, 1875. The next 4 prisoners to die in St. Augustine were all younger warriors. On October 5, 1875, when they were camping as a military company across the Matanzas River on Anastasia Island, Ipaya died of consumption. He was a Kiowa warrior, and his friends tried to hide his body on the island. Just a month later, on November 4th, Big Moccasin, a Cheyenne warrior, died at the fort, and his burial was listed in the Trinity Episcopal Church records. He had been ill with bilious fever and died of uremia, kidney issues.
A slide is titled Starving Wolf or Lean Wolf, Cheyenne Warrior.
Starving Wolf, who was also named as Lean Wolf or Shaving Wolf in some of the documents, died a year later on December 5, 1876. Pratt's letter book describes Starving Wolf's death as him being bedfast for 5 months from paralysis of the lower part of his body from an injury received several years ago. And Spotted Elk, a Cheyenne warrior, died on January 2, 1877, about a month after Starving Wolf. And Pratt's letter to the Adjutant General noted that Spotted Elk had died of tuberculosis paralysis, which I found out affects the lower body. So it really makes me wonder if Starving Wolf really died of tuberculosis and not an old injury.
A slide is titled Spotted Elk, Cheyenne Warrior.
6 months after Spotted Elk's death, Nottowithti, a Comanche warrior, died on July 21st from phthisis, which is pulmonary tuberculosis. He was 26 years old.
A photo of Heap of Birds and one of Pratt's letters.
And then Heap of Birds on October 9th, 1877, he's a Cheyenne chief, died of congestion and heart disease, and he was buried in the Post Cemetery the next day. And finally, on April 11th, 1878, the prisoners left for home, leaving 10 of their kinsmen buried here in Florida. In 1881, the Post Cemetery at St. Augustine became a national cemetery. And on the map from that year, 5 of the 9 prisoners are shown. Their graves are indicated in the red box here, but they were not labeled on the map. Their grave sites were there, but on the legend for the map, they were not listed at all. And like the majority of the burials on this map, where you see the Roman numerals listed, these have all been marked with wooden headboards. But over the years in the Florida climate, wood doesn't do very well, and those boards rotted away. And when the map was created, there were actually numbered blocks of coquina. For those of you that visited the fort yesterday, the stone that's made out of is coquina. They made coquina blocks to mark these unknown graves. And this photograph, you can see, let's see if the pointer works. Nope, it doesn't. You can see one of them between, this is the southern end of the cemetery, used to have a gate, and this photograph is taken through that gate, and it shows one of those coquina blocks. This has Roman numerals L and V for 55. But unfortunately, coquina in that aspect also deteriorates. They just started crumbling away. So again, the wooden headboards rotted away. They used coquina. The coquina deteriorated. And finally, in 1905, the War Department decided it was time to actually put permanent headstones on these graves. There were 5 military headstones ordered at that time, and the inscriptions on them were unknown Indian prisoner. And they were placed on those 5 graves that were visible on that map. However, in late August of 1932, while workers were digging the grave for Amanda Schellenberger, she was the wife of the superintendent, they found one of the unmarked prisoner burials. And the photo on the right shows where that burial was. The 3 other Fort Marion prisoner graves were never looked for. They were never accidentally found. And therefore, there are 6 of those burials in the one grave that we saw in the cemetery yesterday and this morning. And there are 3 other unmarked and unknown graves in that southeast corner of the cemetery.
Dr. Giroux takes a question from a woman in the audience.
Yes. Yes. They were disinterred in 1932 from the separate graves and combined into that one grave. Yeah. So the temporary markers that I made and y'all saw in the cemetery, those mark the original burial locations of the 6 that we know about. And again, there's 3 others in that area somewhere.
Photos of Gordon Yellowman leading a lesson.
So I worked with Noreen Starr and Gordon Yellowman to create a lesson plan for 4th graders. This is where we're trying to get some of this into the curriculum. 4th graders in Florida, those of you who are familiar with the state curriculum, they teach state history during that grade, and if the schools have the funding for it, they actually get to take a field trip to St. Augustine. Now, the cemetery itself is usually not on the agenda because the trolleys and stuff can't make the turns down by the cemetery, but we're trying to get it to where if students want to, that we were able to help them have a actual field trip into the cemetery. So I worked with Gordon and Noreen, and Gordon created a ledger art lesson plan for 4th graders. And then he and Noreen and I created a short video that introduced the teachers and the students to the concept, to the part of the history here, and into how ledger art was created. They were supposed to, the students, watch this in their classrooms before they came to St. Augustine. Turns out on the day that we did this, most of them watched it on the bus on the way to St. Augustine, which, since it was a Monday field trip, is not a bad thing because it had it, in their heads before they actually got into this space.
A student's project poster is displayed.
So the lesson was intended, again, to teach them about what happened at a 4th grade level without causing them any trauma. That was very important to this. And this field trip that we had was back in March of this year. So I had 4 pieces of ledger art for it on art boards, like the foam core we had over there. And I had the map that was shown on the original slide. So Gordon wanted me to start off with the map to make the students understand the level of travel, what it took for them to come here. And then I used the buffalo hunt art to talk about their lives on the plains before they were sent here and before they were captured. Then I showed the wagons, when they were in those wagons, coming into Caddo, which was where the first rail line was. Then the centerpiece one is Jacksonville, Florida. There were drawings like this of many of the cities. They would come, and where they had to change rail lines, they would take them off the train, and all the crowds would come and gawk at them when they were sitting by the train station. And then the bottom image is the one that's on the program. It's called Melancholy Prospect, and that was drawn the second day when they were finally allowed up onto the top of the fort to see the ocean. I just imagine standing up there, smelling that salt air. They had never seen that kind of environment. It's just, yeah.
Photos of students at the gravesite.
So I told a 4-minute story at the gravesite. Kids have, their attention spans are such that we tried to keep it short and sweet. I spoke to them about Aker. She was a young Comanche girl that had come with her parents, and she would have been close to their age. So I tried to establish, a connection with them and the child that came with them. And then I spoke to them about the survivors and their resilience and their strength. And then each child was given a cloth drawstring backpack and markers. And I asked them to draw what they remembered of the story that I had told, or to draw about what they had felt. And they had about 15 minutes to draw, and then they could finish that drawing at home if they needed to. So Noreen had requested that the children sit on the ground while they drew, so we set out places on the sidewalks in the cemeteries over near the gravesite. And this young lady drew the train and part of the fort. And these children, they were amazing, very creative. This young man was drawing the view from the fort out to the lighthouse and the sea. This young man was starting to draw a boat out on the river. This young lady was drawing a very colorful horse. And then this child was drawing the train coming into a city, and he was starting to draw the prisoners when this photograph was taken. So each of them focused on different parts of what I told him, told in the story. This young boy was drawing a warrior on his horse. And afterwards, we had them show, what their artwork was. So I asked the boy in the center of this picture, what are those items on the bottom of your drawing? And he said, those are headstones for the Indians, because they should have had separate ones with their names on them instead of a combined grave. And I mean, that really got me.
Dr. Giroux holds her hand to her heart.
Then in June, I taught 17 K-12 teachers from around the state of Florida what had happened. These teachers were part of UCF's Veterans Legacy Program Institute that was funded by the Department of Veterans Affairs, their National Cemetery Administration, and we partner with Allison Simpson, the command historian of the Florida National Guard. These educators teach from kindergarten all the way through high school, and we had them do the same activities as the fourth graders. And we even had some of them sit on the ground like the children did. In the center of this photograph is Sergeant Major Ray Fullard. He's a high school junior ROTC teacher. And the other teachers kept asking him what his drawing meant. I had told in my story to them, and I talked to Ahnes yesterday. It wasn't him who told me this story, so I'm not sure where I heard it. But I had been told somewhere, someday, that if a warrior had crossed 4 rivers, that they may not ever go home again. So he drew the 4 rivers. And I think that some of the teachers and the students really came away with a ledger art lesson and experience with something that will stay with them. For instance, the young man with the separate headstones, because they deserve to have their own names. And then this young lady, strong. I talked about resilience, I talked about strength. But like in Oklahoma, our educational system in Florida is very challenging to teach these difficult histories. Interacting with the students while they're actually in St. Augustine National Cemetery allows them to ask questions and engage with subjects and materials that are not in their regular textbooks. And it's my hope that together with those of you in the tribal communities that we can create age-appropriate lesson plans across all of the grade levels to be able to teach Florida students about what happened here so that they understand the impact of Fort Marion and the imprisonment and what that had on both the warriors and all of the descendants. Thank you.
The audience applauds as Dr. Giroux steps back from the podium.